Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to another fun filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we're going to talk about the anniversary of Breakfast in America by Supertramp hitting #1 on the US charts. Now, Supertramp had a long road to get to before they became superstars. Their first two albums were sort of in the vein of melodic, somewhat progressive rock. And even at that time, the music was anchored by the two lead songwriters and lead singers of the band. That was, of course, Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson. But the early lineups didn't really capture a sound that audiences felt was unique enough. And while the first two albums, particularly the first, is actually a very good album, the band sort of faded back away and had to regroup. It came back in 1974 with their classic lineup and their classic sound, and this album got them noticed. This was, of course, Crime of the Century, a wonderful album that really was unique among all of the musical trends. It wasn't quite progressive rock, although it had progressive elements. It wasn't really hard rock, but it had a very steady, recognizable beat. Instead, the kind of musical language Supertramp employed on Crime of the Century and all of their subsequent albums was piano driven rock. And specifically, although they used many pianos, both acoustic and electric, it was the Wurlitzer electric piano that really gave them that distinct sound that sort of cuts through everything, especially with the kinds of very rhythmic chords that Supertramp were fond of using. And themes that they explored, despite the rather happy and upbeat nature of the music, ranged from government corruption, corruption in education, the crushing of the individual by society, very Rush-like lyrics, but with a somewhat more direct tone. But it was really the sound that they created, the sound palette that they used with all of their layered pianos and really good production. All of the Supertramp albums from this period had really high production values, and this made them a household name. The members of the band, however, were not a household name generally. They were something of an anonymous band. The pictures generally didn't appear on the covers of the album, and if they did, they were hidden in the corner in the middle of the gatefold. And so they didn't have that kind of visible leadership, if you will, a lead singer, a lead pianist, a lead guitar player that other bands had. And one of the reasons for that, beyond the sort of understated nature of the members, was that they were all multi instrumentalists. So, of course, as I said, Davis and Hodgson were the leaders, both of them most well known for playing keys, Hodgson playing a bit of guitar. Both of them shared lead vocal duties. John Helliwell was a wonderful saxophonist and played just about any reed instrument, played a bit of extra keyboards as well, quite a bit of backing vocals. Then you had Bob Benberg, an American drummer in the band, really, really solid drummer to sort of round out the lineup, and Doogie Thompson, a really good Scottish bass player. And that was, however anonymous they may have been, that was the classic Supertramp lineup. In between Crime of the Century and Breakfast in America, they released two other albums that did relatively well: Crisis, What Crisis, and Even in the Quietest Moments. But it was in 1979 that they released Breakfast in America, and this was the album that put them on the menu, or should I say, on the map. The album didn't have any filler. It was just a rumpus of wonderful music from start to finish that couldn't really be ignored. It refined that classic Supertramp sound, and the band wrote really good songs. They were both, in terms of Hodgson and Davis, and the whole band really, great writers and arrangers. And the themes were things that stuck in your head, the musical arrangements stuck in your head, and it was the kind of thing you could drive along to. Breakfast in America was maybe a kind of homage to the idea of the great American breakfast, but it was also a sign that they were really trying in earnest to break into the American charts. And boy, did they ever. Even though it was recorded in 78 and released in 79, Breakfast in America really dominated American FM radio throughout the early 80s. The next album sold relatively well as well, and this was from 1982, Famous Lost Words, but it was also to be the last album of that classic lineup because Hodgson and Davis became sort of they sort of butted into each other. Musically, there was great symbiosis. Hodgson's sort of very high alto voice, a kind of John Anderson of Yes type of thing, meshed really well with the more tenor tones of Davis, and their piano playing abilities meshed so well together, but off the stage they did not like each other. So they carried on without Hodgson for a couple of other albums throughout the 80s, and they sold respectably, and they were good albums, but it was really that magic between Hodgson and Davis that really made Supertramp absolutely marvelous. And this album was an album that, again, it sort of had one foot in the 70s and one foot in the 80s without resorting to the musical tropes of either decade. It wasn't a guitar driven, foot tapping, sort of typical heavy or mainstream 70s rock album, but nor was it a synth driven, drum machine driven 80s album. It was simply classic Supertramp, and no other band really copied that style of that pounding rhythmic chords on the electric piano, which let the world know that someone out there, maybe even right now, is listening to a Supertramp album. So, happy birthday to Breakfast in America, an album whose cover was memorable and later became controversial. Some say that it predicted a horrific event. Some say it was a coincidence. I'll let you look that up and you be the judge. Obviously, leave a comment if you know what I'm referring to, because, hey, it's interesting. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.